share it under the technical club.
So you go to home, then is a technical club, preparations, and then you will see different scenarios which we recommend, and actually you will see on the next slide our preferred scenario.
And these are the setups that Watchcom, our security partner, set up for us, and we shared for you so you could read what they recommend, like hardening the server. There are 3 different scenarios here, and our recommended scenario is scenario number 2.
That's the scenario where we use reverse proxy on the DMZ server. So you don't install any SuperOffice software on the DMZ server, only the reverse proxy. And it's configured in a way that it passes all the requests from outside to the internal SuperOffice server, where net server, web server, and other software is installed. External firewall protects you from the attackers from outside. An internal firewall between DMZ and the server makes sure if the DMZ location is compromised, could be compromised through other system, that the internal firewall will pass only calls to net server through the 80 or 333 443 port. So it's much more secure, and the chances they will get in are reduced.
And then if you install service first, it will create the hostname for all products. If you leave the tick, it's default ticked. So if you have it already, then just untick it. There's no way to install in subdirectories. For 8.1, we require that both sales and service run on the same domain. So you can't have a subdomain for service and one for sales. Like many used to have SNM superoffice.com for sales, and then support superoffice.com for service. This won't work from 8.1. The reason is that the web client now is doing all authentication. So when you go to the service URL, like the script/FCGI, it's automatically to be redirected to the web client's login page.
I just wanted to add that you can't install service on the default site, because when you then run EJ turn setup, it will ask you for a site name, and there is no way to enter the default site, so you always need to install on a host name.
And then when you install it on, for our example, we use SOCRM myorganization.com. You will install it there, and that would be the root. So you want to add a different application, so you can move sales into one application and service into one, which will make it easier to redirect if you just want to expose certain part of SuperOffice to the internet. This is done by you add an application, and then you add service to install service there, and we move all paths to point to service points to the www/doc folder, which is under where you install service. CS plugins need to be an application, which is under CS plugins. Scripts the same. All of this is documented on TechDoc with the different steps. And then you just remove the folders under the host.
And then you can make a file in the root of the application. So if customer enters that address, it will automatically forward him to sales login page. But that's been like for the service for a long time.
Then you install web. Because service do need the web services that the web client installer sets up. You could run just the normal installation and use the built-in web services, or you could install net servers separate to have sales running its own net server and service and Pocket running in Outbound. But you could also install everything as one big package. So you have, when you run the installer, you will see it defaults exposes net server web services, which is all the services endpoints and what service needs when you run the EO term setup later. From 8.1, I think, you need to generate the symmetric keys and the symmetric secret text. It's default blank instead of default filled with standard text.
The requirement which has been there from the beginning to have IIS 6 metabase compatibility is still there, because this is the interface we use to get list of websites from IIS. So when you install the web, to get the drop down with all the sites on IIS, you need to have that IIS 6 metabase compatibility installed. That's been there for a long time. It's still the same.
Impersonate user, after you install web, you have this configurator that pops up immediately. We see that if you do not set the impersonator user, you will most likely end up in a situation where having document web tools up and down loading failing, Mailink will fail. So make sure that you add an impersonate user that actually have access to the temp and SRC.
And be aware about the password policy, because we've seen cases where administrator from the customer provided a user as an impersonate user who had the password policy to change the password every 90 days. Of course, you install it, you forget it, and then after 90 days, he was surprised that it stopped working. So make sure that user, it's away from the time password policy. It can have the complexity password, that's not a problem. Just, or if you remember to change it every 90 days.
Could use a service to add a ticket that automatically pops up in 90 days.
And use the Zapier to sketch the
yes.
Yeah?
It's easier to just use the impersonate user. An EO term setup. We have had cases where people have been able to run this more than once, which is done by someone editing the database, which is bad. So you only run it once, and then when you have installed it, like we recommend in this presentation, when they ask for hostname, it's /service, which will set the reg ID inside the database correctly. If you forget it, you will end up with a login page after install that looks kind of trashy, missing all the CSS. So that's actually easy to see if you have forgotten it.
If you still play with EJ-term setup and manage to run it multiple times, every time you run it, to the end, it will populate the database with some reply templates and many other things. So we've seen databases where it was there 7 times, and there's no automated tool to clean it. So you mess it up, you manually clean it. Also, when you run it multiple times, it increases the sequence number in the sequence table for the config table, and service expects that the config line has ID number 1. So even if everything seems to be okay and the config record in the config table doesn't have an ID number 1, it will still fail. So there are multiple points where it fails, and we prevent you from running them multiple times, and we know if you ran it multiple times, you had to fix it manually somehow.
So backup, then run. It's the sales client which does all the authentication from 8.1. This means that if you are logged out from service, you're redirected to the login dialog, and it's checking the base URL, which is a preference inside sales. The preference is set by EO term setup if it's not there already. Yeah, I see we switch from using just SOCRM My Organization sales to SuperOffice sales. Never mind. Authentication. We do have now, and you've probably heard about Super ID coming, but for on-site now, we have SuperOffice authentication, which is where you add username and password inside admin client. Or we had the AD authentication, which maps you to the AD user. And then when it comes to AD authentication versus the single sign-on, and with the single sign-on we mean this automatic login to the client without being presented with the login dialog. You don't want this in the web client when it's exposed to the internet, because that would mean that you have to expose AD to the internet. Security.
So we've seen a confusion what people mean by single sign-on. We provide AD authentication, which means the username and password which you enter into the login screen. It's checked against the data in the AD. And single sign-on, as Margrethe said, it's the way to automatically log you in to the system. That's what we don't mean by the AD authentication.
And when you have the login dialog, it's important that you protect it behind HTTPS, because it will be sent in a post which will expose the password unless you have secured it. And never mind, this is not my real password. So, who here has set up River Proxy? I know you and you. It's quite easy, isn't it? But it's fast when it's up. Kjell, you're my friend. Yeah.
So if you want to use reverse proxy, we have to do a few steps to get it installed. So first to go to IS Manager and click on the right hand side, get new web platform components. That will take you to a website where you will download a program which is actually an extension to IS Manager. It's called the Web Platform Installer. Once is it installed, you run it, you will get a new icon in IS Manager. So you run the Web Platform Installer and you will find either by search or by list through the available applications, the application request routing 3.0. You click Add and it will install, three things: external cache, URL, rewrite, and application request routing. So once you are done installing, you will have a new icon on I think this is the site level, I'm not sure, but you will have a new icon on the site level, application request routing.
And you also see the icon for server farms.
Yeah.
And all of these rules are also discussed on Tech Talk. But you set up both inbound and outbound rule. When you set up the inbound, remember to uncheck the enable SSL's offloading.
Yeah, so the inbound rule is for incoming requests to reverse proxy to pass it into the inside server with SuperOffice. The outbound rule, it's the opposite, to change or rewrite the request back from the inside server to the internet. So it's easy if you have two sub-applications, if you separate installation of service and sales into two subfolders, because there you can change the pattern and put there a /service or /sales, and you can expose only one of the two. You don't need to expose on internet everything if you don't want to. Web tools, as you hopefully know, we don't longer distribute web tools with web installation. For a while, we have them on a service called download service. So if you go to web and click download or install web tools, it will talk to this service, which has the address www.superoffice.com/download service, and it will download the most suitable version for your web automatically. There are some rules which version is compatible with which version of web, and there is a nice article on TechDoc detailing all the compatibility, what will happen if you manually install a new version, which version is automatically selected, and so on. Mailing, we still distribute with the Win client. For the Win client and for the web, it's part of the web tools. But very recently, we have added a mailing as a separate downloadable on the download service. So you don't need to, you don't need any longer. If you want to upgrade only mailing on Win manually, you don't need to download the whole web tools, run it, extract the mailing only, extract the exe. You can just download the mailing, which now follows the version of the latest web tool. So this is the latest edition, just a separate mailing installation or installer on the download service.
Why don't you provide any style files to it?
Not yet. It's known, and this is how it is. I on the TechDoc put a guide how to extract MSI. Yeah, but this is how it is now. Yeah.
We have been slightly busy with the GDPR functionality.
But we know there is a requirement, so I put there a paragraph how to extract them, which is a bit cumbersome, but it's not the end of the world. It's doable with a few clicks. Yeah, and there is because this is quite complex information. On that link, you will read more about the compatibility, how it handles the upgrades.
Upgrade. Do many of you do upgrades still on pre 8 to? Yes. There are quite a few steps. You have to be on 8, which I think earlier this week I heard someone going from 4.5 and up to 8, which is should have stayed on 4.5. That was really fast to log into. But you have to go to 8 first. And then Server Setup is the only official installer for DB upgrade. Now that's with CDD. Do you all know what I mean with CDD? Continuous database development. It means that the developers now have a tool to add in any tables and fields anytime they feel like it. And they also moved the old imp files, which was stored on the CD, and you could choose to update the priming data later. That's also dictionary steps now. So the imp files are gone. You could, if you need to import data, create your own, and there's a description on TechDoc how you make it. But the default priming data is just inside the DLLs delivered with DB Setup and SuperOffice. So This means that whenever we change SuperOffice company and Petter and Alexander comes in and they want to have their name under the SuperOffice company, Helena now have to make a dictionary step that actually updates this information in the customer database. Same with lists and red letter days. And this is also why we now call it releases instead of service releases. Service releases, we said that there won't be any database changes, and now we make no guarantees.
I had a question recently, why is not 8.20 and 8.30 available on the download? The answer is there's no 8.20. There is 8.2 release 1, which is the first version of 8.2, 8.3 R1 release 1. So we changed from service release 1, so we before used 8.0000, 8.0 SR1, which was like the second release. So that's gone, and we start with release 1, release 2. So don't look up 8.200, doesn't exist. It starts release 1, release 2, etc.
And it's no longer possible to ignore the database upgrades. They are there and running as a dictionary step. You will see a small dialogue when you run it, saying which steps it is adding to the database, making changes.
So before we see service releases, you were sure that between service releases we didn't change the database structure, and you could run a later client against a bit older database if it was the same main version. But now with releases where we can change the database schema with every release, you can't do that. You need to have the correct client with the correct database version, correct release.
So when you upgrade from earlier version where they may have split sales and service, you now have to decide where should it be located. Helene, what's the database table?
Product version.
Product version?
In the product version, you will see the history of all the... That's a history list. You will see all the dictionary steps which have been read by that version, and also you will see that the last line is the last version. So there you will see the whole history of that specific database.
Yeah, the old preference table, which is not user preference but preference, where we did write the so when you upgrade, you have 3 possibilities. You move everything into the service domain. You move everything into the old sales domain. Or you move both into a new one. Now the easiest is to move sales. Sales is just to run the installer and it's up and running. But then again, if you had support superoffice.com as the domain for service, then you may want to change it and move it. There's a description on all of these because in some scenarios you want to update. If you move service to a new domain, there are some absolute paths in the database, and you need to run a script, which we have provided for you. But if you don't run it, then customers may end up with messages pointing them to the wrong location. So there are some URLs in the config table, and Martin changed it so you now see it as it is in the systems settings system screen of service. It's the internal URL and the CGA bin path together, as seen from IIS, is what we use to send out any email for sales to know where is service installed. And anywhere we need to know the absolute path of where service is. The external URL is for the customer part, the customer-facing part, like marketing and customer FCGI, customer Excel, the customer center where they could check their cases if you have exposed service to the internet. They may be the same URL or they may differ. So any external rec is the external. And this is from system settings system. Settings.
So there is the internal URL, external URL, and we add whatever is in the CGI path to get the complete URL. So as Margrethe said, the internal is how it is accessed from inside to communicate within the system on the internal level, and the external URL is what's sent out to the customer, what needs to be accessible from outside.
Now, if you have moved everything, you may not be able to get into this screen. Then you have to go to the database, and it's in the database table config. Now, if you install using the reverse proxy, you will, when you install service, use the internal URLs to install it first time. Then we recommend that you add a separate key with the external hostname, pointing to the same base path as the internal one. But then when you later upgrade service, it knows where to find where you have installed all the service program files. So when you run the upgrade for service, you're not stuck on this exception quote in main where it defaults on the C eJournal config table, which is old history from before we did buy up eJournal and started to call it customer service.
Is this step clear? Why is it there? Yeah.
You're not nodding heavily now.
In the previous presentation, there used to be the whole script. We changed the fixed URLs if you move the service to a different domain. It's on a tech doc. This is just to list the tables which needs to be changed, or the content where it needs to be changed. So in these 6 tables, we keep static URLs for service. So use the script and just boom, and in bulk update. On a SQL level, you will update the content to the new URLs. Otherwise, you will be missing pictures, references to attachments, many things.
With boom, you mean? Kind of depends on your database. It didn't take very long, actually, when we did it on our database, our monster database.
Yeah, there is a new requirement with skill. When we use skill, the external browser or the browser needs to have access to web scripts and JavaScripts, vendor scripts and JavaScripts from the web installation. So you need to make sure that if you configure the reverse proxy from the browser, these 2 folders need to be accessible. It doesn't need to be actually those actual folders from the web installation. You can copy them and move them somewhere where they will appear, like coming from the correct domain for the browser. Those are static files. There's nothing custom specific, but they need to be accessible from the browser. Otherwise, especially the subscription form, the subscription page on the GDPR functionality or the forms, they won't work because they reference those 2 files in those 2 folders. Other thing is to have the correct base URL. If you change the HTTP into HTTPS, it will fail too. So those 2 things need to be set correctly, that the skill parts of SuperOffice work okay.
So the subscription part is actually using service functionality. So this is more one of the closer the zipper project where we are integrating the 2 clients more and more. So it's in service using sales functionality with the skill. You know what the skill is? You're so...
Pocket, just a few words. I'm sure you all know that the Pocket server is obsolete. We connect the Pocket client directly to net server services. There was a heated discussion on the tech doc, how to do it correctly. Some people ask if it's okay to install net server on the DMZ and connect it to internal net server as a hop. First, it's dangerous. Second, it doesn't work because the net server where the Pocket is connected to needs to have access to to SOR and to temp. So that is first dangerous and second doesn't work. So it's now stated clearly on the Pocket page of the tech doc, but that just to remind you that if you want Pocket, you need to again use reverse proxy and publish or make those services from net server available to internet.
I'm not sure you're all aware, but sometimes you could experience some minor issues with performance. And if that is in sales, there is a screen graph that will give you an instant look at where could the problem be. If this is an intermittent performance problem, then this won't help you. But if it's happening now, something is really slow, you may go to RMS FCGI's question action equal performance, and these 4 graphs will appear. The 4 graphs are actually running 10 calls for each graph, and the CPU one, it runs a method that generates a password 100,000 times for every data point in this graph. Disk will actually save an attachment of 1 megabyte to disk and then overwrite it 5 times before it deletes it for every data point. The DB is actually using FH query, which is more of an internal service calling the database, where it will fetch the database row with ID 1 from the config table 100 times. And net server is doing the same call, but here using a search engine. So you will see where is actually the performance problems hitting you. Again, if it's intermittent or in sales, this won't do much for you. It's a snapshot of what happens now, or in the 10 rounds this is actually being executed.
It happens quite fast, so as you can see on the timeline, it's probably the last 15 seconds. So you don't see what happened an hour ago, so it's actually what's happening right now, or now minus a few seconds. So you can see the trends. If there's anything running high, then you can identify a problem with a specific part of the installation.
And this is my baby. You all know the user and statistics sync that we have running. When you install on-site, this is presented to the administrator, and they have to accept or reject or just ignore it. But when they accept it, it sets 2 preferences inside user preference of the database. These will follow the database, and if you, like you of course wouldn't do, take a copy of your production database and use it in another environment, and this is running, and you start to delete users. The users are synced into our database. They may, in many cases, be community user, and you just kick them out. So I'm not saying that you should do this, But if you copy your production database, please turn this off for the test. Believe me, I see when you haven't. And the
I said a few words before, so compatibility reports when we get or when the new server version is out, Office version is out, OS is out, we test all our products against that, and we produce a nice spreadsheet, the compatibility report, publish it there, and I'm just about to publish for the Office 2019. There's the URL, and I also update the table, there is in the preparations the tested version, so there are these green checks and red crosses, so I also update that table. So under compatibility tests or reports, you can find a detailed report, what's been tested, and if there were any bugs found. And then on the tested versions, you can just find the green or red box, checkbox.
If no issues are found when we do the compatibility test, then most likely previous versions will work fine as well. But we don't give any guarantees. Do you have some insight on the SQL Server 19?
I have the report, but
shouldn't have asked. Yeah. Any questions? No. You have one.
Regarding OTDC.
Okay.
Is it possible to run with Windows authentication all the way when communicating to the database?
Yes.
Yeah.
Instead of using an SQL authentication, is it possible to run Windows
All the way.
all the way?
Yes. I do believe I had issues when I installed it last time. But that's like a year and a half ago.
It depends also on version. I would say a year-old version, it's possible. The problem is in the net server. On the first page, when you have this connection string, you need to see at the bottom to use the SQL authentication. Yeah. Or the AD authentication of the SQL. If you see there, then it's ready for it and it will work. So if you take 7.5, it's not there.
I had some issues with setting up service. So it seems to use not the user name communicating over the PC. It instead uses the host, like the computer, instead of the user.
I do believe I had the same problem when I installed it. And then if you just... I think during installing, I set it in mix mode and then switch. Yeah. Close? Oh, good question. Wildcard. Yeah. It has to, you can't use a self-signed, but it has to be, yeah.
Valid. Yeah, but I think these wildcards will work, but the self-signed doesn't work at some places. Yeah, but the wildcards should work. Yeah.
There were some Android versions who had blocked wildcards that were not accepting the wildcards for that. We had some cases. Then they switched it to a normal script not wildcard, and some but there are all the Android versions.
Then I think you don't, when you install the certificate on the web server, you must add the certificate from the provider.
The certificate authorities.
Yeah. Yes.
So the certificate has to be on the reverse proxy side and on the internal, to make that clear. That's very important.
On the reverse proxy, definitely needs to be. On internal, should be too, because the SSL is not offloaded, so it passes SSL inside, so it should be there.
And
Yeah.
a service can't yet talk to NetServer using, we are waiting for REST. And if you saw the presentation earlier, we do have a ticket agent on the way. So hopefully soon. But you have been waiting for Travelgate as a service, so you know soon it's coming.
Yeah. Yeah.
Normal question. Is there any plans of like encrypting the config file?
That's a great question for the next session. And you could win a T-shirt.
I had a case where different clients actually, because they didn't make a server reference to the client folder, but install the entire SuperOffice folder. So potential the different clients could look directly down into the service folder. That was, most people don't know they can find passwords there.
Yeah.
It's not that secure.
But the best is to ask after the break in the QA session. There will be the right people to answer it.
Okay.
No other question? No.
If we go back to those two folders you were talking about before,
For skill,
if I understand Stia correct, they have changed how they are writing the application, so they have corrected it. Doesn't need to be
okay, then I need to ask him, because I know there is a plan to do it in a little bit different way, but that didn't get to me.
in 8.4. That's what is told me.
Okay,
They
then
did have some low-hanging fruits, as they call them, and they do some black projects and fix stuff that doesn't take too much work. It's just to share the knowledge.
I can ask, it didn't get to me, so far I thought this is needed. Of course, if you are right, I will update it on the Tech Talk.
Then it's just from 8.4.
Yeah, of course, I will update it that it's from 8.4 different.
Yes?
It's a bit big deal, but sometimes when you stop the website and then you upgrade the web, it seems to be important enough times that aren't getting updated.
Okay. Which ones?
Maybe there's so many keys. And I can't really see the pattern why these don't get updated. You just replace it with another installation.
I don't have this experience, so
Is EO scheduler running?
guys,
Hmm?
it happens.
Yeah, happens also in sales, that in the web config certain informations did not get updated. Like the version number stays like for the old version, even if you're using a newer version, and then it fails. And then you fix the web config. And then
Yeah, but you said that the files are not upgraded.
In the bin folder,
Yeah.
you have the support URLs that frequently are not updated. And you just replace them for another installation and run it. And that's a security. So it's not just me.
Okay.
But if it's on Elena, then I know.
I don't have any comment on that.
If
Yeah.
you could just email us, and then we could
Yeah.
look into
It's
it.
definitely something holding that up. We need to find. Did you try to use Process Monitor, the Process Monitor, to see what's been? Yeah, that's the way. If something is holding up the files. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you want to know more, the Process Monitor will tell you which is or what is holding those files open, and then we will know more.
And it's easier to fix if you actually tell us.
I think if you stop the application tool and check the process, it may take some time. If you stop the application tool and then try to start immediately, you get an error. Then the process is still running. So in my script,
We could actually check with Jarl if he had had any issues with it when he has upgraded our environment.
If I don't do this, I get weird errors sometimes.
You're saving all your other questions for the...
T-shirt party.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Yes.